everyone, and welcome to Sips and Stories. My name is Elizabeth, and in today's video, I will be wrapping up all of the books I read in 2021. This year was another crazy year, but also another really amazing reading year for me. I think the pandemic has been hard on all of us, but the opportunity to read all the books that I read in 2020 and 2021 is something that I will always be grateful for. I had the chance to read so many of these books that have been on my TBR forever, so many of these classics that are now new favorites of mine and ones that I want to recommend to everyone else out there as well, because they really helped me this year. They helped encourage me and inspire me, and I really think they will inspire a lot of you as well. So grab your favorite beverage as I discuss my top 10 favorite books of 2021. At number 10 was probably my favorite memoir of the year, and that is Girl from Yam Hill by Beverly Cleary. And like many people, I did read this book, A Girl from Yam Hill and On My Own Two Feet, which is the sequel to this book, in honor of Beverly Cleary, who passed away this year at the age of 104. And I just have a tremendous respect for authors, especially children's authors. And I think that Beverly Cleary is one of those groundbreaking authors who really set the stage for modern children's writing. Before Beverly Cleary, a lot of these children's books, some of which I'll talk about today, were too kind of over the top. They were all set in England. They were about wealthy people, about princes and princesses. And then when Beverly Cleary came along, she just kind of flipped the script a little bit in children's literature, and she started talking about everyday average kids, especially here in America, just, having friendships, going to school, living their lives. And again, the series Ramona is one of my favorite children's book series. And when you read Girl from Yam Hill, you really learn that Beverly Cleary herself was Ramona, that the inspiration for that character, the independence of Ramona, the spunkiness of Ramona, can trace its roots directly back to Beverly Cleary's childhood, growing up on her farm in Yamhill, Oregon, and then going to school in Portland, Oregon. It also is very serious to this book. It talks about the Depression and how it affected Oregon in particular, and Portland. Her dad loses his job at one point. The family is very poor. They're trying to make ends meet, and then how it affects everyone in her neighborhood, the Depression. She also talks about her relationship with her mother, which was a very strained relationship. Even as a child, her mother was one of those demanding and kind of controlling mothers. And so that really starts to affect her in very interesting ways as she gets older throughout middle school and high school, and as she goes away to college. Really fantastic book. I loved it. And yeah, I love Beverly Cleary. The next book that I read was Passing by Nella Larson. And sorry, this is one of those fancy penguin editions. There you go. Anyways, I really, really enjoyed this book. It's been on my TBR, especially the last couple of years. It seems like a lot of people have been talking about it. It is about these two African-American women who both are light-skinned, and one of the women, Claire, she passes her off as a white woman. She's even married to a white man that has no idea that she is African-American and is very racist. And then she reconnects with a childhood friend, Irene, in this book, who is also light-skinned as well, interestingly enough, but has ingratiated herself in this world, especially in Harlem, which was just on the forefront of everything at that time. She's involved with organizations like the NAACP. She's friends with a lot of important people, like I want to say Booker T. Washington and people like that. W. Du Bois, all those people. It's really good because Claire, when Irene meets Claire's husband, she's very judgmental. Like, how could you possibly be with a racist man like him? How would you not tell him who you really are? But then you understand Claire's motivations as well. Like, why should she? Like, if she can pass as a white woman and get all the privileges of a white woman at that time, why wouldn't she do that? So things get really interesting when Claire's husband goes away on a business trip, and so she decides to accompany Irene back to Harlem, back to this world that she has denied most of her adult life, and just how she kind of automatically gets ingratiated in this world, and Irene gets a little jealous in certain respects. Love this. I really love Nella Larson's writing style. It reminds me a lot of her contemporaries like Daphne du Maurier. So the writing is very crisp and very elegant, very descriptive details, but then there's also this hidden sinister element to it and this unreliable narrator a little bit. Really enjoyed this one. I'm very curious if this one has made it onto some state curriculums now, especially at the high school level. I think this one belongs in any unit on the Harlem Renaissance, and some of those people like Langston Hughes. I think Nella Larson should be in those teaching units now as well. So I'm curious how this book is making it into the classroom, because it's only 120 pages, but it really packs a punch, and I can really see a lot of high school classrooms benefiting from this book. At number 8 is The Greengage Summer by Rumer Godden, and this is a folio edition, which is why it's a naked hardback. The title is on the spine there. And I did show this book in my Summer TBR, so if you want to watch that video, you can see some of the beautiful illustrations in this and some of those close-up shots, because I love folio editions, and this was really one of my favorite folio editions that I purchased this year. Anyways, I really enjoyed The Greengage Summer. It's one of those books that not a lot of people talk about. It's one of those hidden gems, especially in the classics world, especially by female authors. So I first heard about it on Miranda Mill's channel. It really reminds me of books like I Captured the Castle by Dodie Smith. It has a very similar kind of coming of age quality to it, especially with these two sisters, Joss and Cecil. And what it's about these group of children, from Joss, who is a 16-year-old girl, all the way to like little kids who go on vacation with their mother, their single mother, in France. And the mother gets sick, and not deathly sick, but sick enough where she has to go to the hospital for a couple weeks. So it's all about these children who are just running loose in this French hotel in Provence in the countryside, and they're just getting exposed to this whole adult lifestyle. That's why it's a great coming of age story. And the hotel's owner, Madame Zizi, she's this very sophisticated woman, but she resents them all being there, especially the eldest daughter, Joss, because her boyfriend, Elliot, is kind of making eyes at Joss because Joss is coming of age. She's very young, she's very beautiful. And there's this relationship forming between Joss and Elliot. Meanwhile, the narrator, Cecil, who I would say is probably like, I don't know, 14 or 15, she also secretly likes Elliot as well. And so just the jealousy that she has towards Madame Zizi and her sister, it's really interesting. And then all the way down to the little children as well. Even the little kids are very unique and special in this book, and it's all about just how Elliot takes them all around the French countryside to wineries and restaurants and on trips, and just kind of exposes them to this glamorous, sophisticated culture that is the French culture of wine and the good life and food and travel. And all the kids are drinking champagne and smoking cigarettes. I love this book so much. It also has a little bit, again, a kind of a sinister element to it, kind of some unexpected plot twists and things like that. Really good. I think they did turn it into a movie as well, an old Hollywood movie. I have not seen the movie, but now that I read the book and loved it as much as I did, I really want to go back and watch that movie now. So again, thank you to Miranda. This was a fantastic book, The Greengage Summer. At number 7 is a excellent YA novel, and that is More Than This by Patrick Ness. And in 2021, it seems like I read a lot of great YA novels. So if you are one of those snobby adult readers that just doesn't have time for YA, I would say, you know, you might want to rethink that, because there's so much quality literature in the YA genre, and More Than This is a perfect example of it. And I'd hate for a lot of adult readers that I know would enjoy this to miss it because it's a YA novel. I felt that way too about M.T. Anderson's Feed, which I read earlier this year as well. Another excellent YA novel that really pertains to our times. But out of the two, it does seem like More Than This won the day for me. It is kind of a dystopian coming-of-age story about a young man named Seth who drowns. Right at the beginning of the book, he drowns, he dies, he wakes up in this other place. And we don't know as the reader, where is he? Is it heaven? Is it hell? He seems to be in a very familiar place, except he's all alone by himself. So it kind of has like elements a little bit like to the Twilight Zone. Many readers, if you go back on Goodreads, will describe this as like the teenage version of The Matrix, which is why I thought it would also be very timely right now, since that 4th installment of The Matrix just came out. And it is, it's very similar to The Matrix, and in terms of, you know, what is fate, what is destiny versus free will, and a lot of those themes are in this book. I do feel that it goes a little bit more in depth than The Matrix, that there's more heart to this book, there's more soul to this book than The Matrix, and I think that's why I really enjoyed it. It deals with some very serious themes though, so it deals a lot with depression and self-help and mental illness and things like that. And it even gets into some childhood trauma and child abuse and things like that as well. So if you're triggered by some of those issues, you might want to stay clear from this. In fact, had I known that those themes were in this, I might have avoided this book, but I'm so grateful that I didn't know that and that I did read it, because it was so excellent. And I can't say much more about it because I don't want to ruin it for anybody, because one of the joys of this book is just how Patrick Ness writes the book and narrates the book, and how he builds this suspense throughout the book. He's just a master at suspense and how he builds this story. So excellent. I think a lot of authors would really enjoy this because he is a master at that. And now all of his other books, including The Monster Calls and The Knife of Never Letting Go, books that I never thought I would read in a million years, now those are top of my TBR for 2022. Oh my goodness, at number 6 is Cross Creek by Marjorie Kinnan Rawlings. Oh, I love this book so much. In fact, this was one of the last books that I read this year. I just finished it last week. I closed it with that contented sigh. You know, when you finish a book and you're just like, oh, I just loved it. It was so good. Last year, her book, The Yearling, was my favorite book of 2020, so I will link that video below, my 2020 wrap up. Again, if you have not read The Yearling, stop right now, go get that book and read it. It's so beautiful. The reason I love Marjorie Kinnan Rawlings is I just love her writing style. I am so addicted to her writing now. She is very similar, for me at least, as Ella Montgomery. And Ella Montgomery is my favorite writer because of her excellent descriptive details of people and of nature. And very few writers can do that. And Marjorie Kinnan Rawlings is a genius at that. Not only can she write about these amazing characters that just jump off the page, she also has these beautiful passages of nature and animals. So good. What this book is about is it's her memoir of living on her farm, her orange grove, Cross Creek in Florida, in the Florida backwoods in the 1930s and in the 1940s. And she meets all these really crazy, kooky characters, all these fellow tenement farmers, both white families and black families, and they're really interesting people. They are very independent and poor and proud, but extremely generous and kind at the same time. There's just a quality to these people that as a modern reader, you're just like, why can't I meet people like this? They are just characters, and it's phenomenal. And you see where the inspiration for The Yearling came from. Also some of her other books, which I haven't read yet, like Jacob's Ladder. Some of these characters are just heartbreaking. And then again, she talks about the orange grove itself, of just the plants and the animals, the alligators and the snakes, but at the same time, the birds and just the beauty, the deer, the beauty of this landscape. And I just got back from Florida, and the amount of vegetation and wildlife in Florida is just out of control. It's really special. So if you do like Florida, I think you'll really enjoy this book. And I would say there's one negative to this book, and that would be a lot of people accuse Marjorie Kinnan Rawlings of being racist. And if you go on Goodreads, you'll read some very negative reviews. You'll see people like me that gush about this book, that love it, love the nature writing, love the characters. And then you'll see some people that just cannot get past the racism that was prevalent in the South at that time. And in fact, I won't lie, Marjorie Kinnan Rawlings had a number of women that were African American that were her maids. She had a lot of her farm hands were African American. And her attitude is a little bit elitist, I won't lie. She does enjoy the privileges of a single white woman, but she's also not afraid to get in there and get her hands dirty. There's a lot of situations in this book where she befriends everyone, both black and white families. She tries to help them. She does the right thing. She forms these bonds and relationships with them. In fact, her mentor in the book is Martha, an older African-American woman, and they just have this bond. Also, one of her maids, Geechee, I think that story is beautiful, how Geechee just comes out of the woods and demands to work for her, just this independence of Geechee and just how Marjorie gets involved with Geechee and her family. And then at the end, Adela, I believe Adela was her last maid, and Adela became a writer as well and even published her own memoir. So jury's still out until I read Adela's memoir, but Margaret Cannon Rawlings was also dear friends with people like Zora Neale Hurston, who is also a very famous Florida native writer. So that's why I don't consider her a racist. I consider her just a very smart, independent, complicated woman. If you're interested in this book, I do recommend the movie, which kind of glosses over some of those things, but is really good as well. In fact, the movie is one of my mom's favorite movies, and now she wants to read the book. But excellent. I'd hate for people to miss out on the writing and the stories in this, because it does capture that culture and that time period in America's history very well. Love this book. One of my favorites of this year. The next book that I read in 2021 at number 5 was also very special for me, and that was The Wind in the Willows by Kenneth Grahame. So here we have a children's book that is a classic that I have never read before, so that is very rare for me. I love children's classics. It's my all-time favorite genre. I'm even contemplating getting a degree in children's classics. That's how much I love it, and starting my own children's bookstore. So the fact that I never read this was a real just no for me. So I knew I had to polish it off, and I did. I really enjoyed it more than I thought I was going to. I think there's something very special about these old childhood classics that are over 100 years old. There's something that as a modern reader you just latch on to, and I don't know if it's nostalgia, I don't know if these books were just written at a higher level, but that's certainly the case with Wind in the Willows. It's just coming from this whole other place. And also there is this wistfulness to Wind in the Willows. There's this melancholy feeling to it that you don't see in modern children's books. And the fact that older children's authors were willing to go in that direction was really interesting to me. It's very well written. The nature writing, again, is fantastic in this, the descriptive details. And then, of course, my favorite character is Ratty. I think Ratty is probably the alter ego of Grahame himself. I think people have said that. And just the wistfulness that Ratty has in that chapter, Wayfarers All. Also, the chapter where they meet the god Pan. Oh my goodness, it's so good. And just the relationship and the dynamics that these animals have with each other, Ratty and Mole and Badger, and just how that is offset by the humor of Mr. Toad, of stealing the car and going to jail and all of Mr. Toad's crazy antics and how they staged that intervention with Mr. Toad. So genius book, and you don't realize until you're an adult how much of a genius book this is. I loved it, and I'm so happy that I finished it in 2021. All right, the next book at number 4, and some of you might be thinking, how could you rate that number 4? Simply because it's just not my favorite book, but I get it now. I appreciate it now. And that is Lord of the Rings by J.R.R. Tolkien. As I said before, up until this year, I had never read these books. I had just seen the movies. I was a little turned off by the violence of those movies. And now that I've read the source material, I have to say these books are so much more charming than the movies. There's more of a sweetness to the actual books than there is in Peter Jackson's film adaptations. And that's why I really loved it and why I really appreciated it. And in fact, some of my favorite characters were not even in those movies, including Tom Bombadil. When I read about Tom Bombadil and Goldberry, those chapters, I just fell in love, and then it continued throughout the rest of the book. And the scenes where they were in the woods with the fairies, so beautiful. It was almost getting kind of Shakespearean, biblical. The writing in this is on a whole nother level. And I do feel that I'm finally getting Tolkien now, that his genius has escaped me throughout my life. I've always known he was a great writer, one of those classic fantasy writers, but now I know why. Because he just created this whole world. He Where other authors stay at the surface level of things, Tolkien just gets down deep and just goes layer upon layer with all of these characters and situations, and it almost reads like it's a history book versus a story. It feels very real. It feels like Middle Earth actually exists in another dimension or another consciousness. I love this so much, and so I'm really looking forward to finishing the series up in 2022. Also, for any fans of Wind in the Willows, I couldn't help making the connection this year between those two books. I'm really happy I read them in the same year. They do say that Tolkien was inspired by Wind in the Willows, and you can see the connection with the hobbits in particular, just how they're cozy and they love food and they love entertaining friends and family, and they live in those holes underground and in those burrows. Very similar to the characters of Ratty and Mole and Mr. Badger. And I just thought that was something special that I learned this year. So if you are a Tolkien fan, you might want to go back and reread Wind in the Willows as well. I think you'll really appreciate it. At number 3 is another fantastic book, and that is Tenant of Wallfell Hall by Anne Bronte. This was my favorite read of Victober. I just fell in love with this book when I read it. I thought I was either gonna really like it or just not get it. And I'm just one of those people that really, really likes Tenant of Wallfell Hall. Not just because of the feminist themes, not just because this is one of the first books in history that talks about a woman leaving an abusive marriage and saving herself and saving her innocent child. Not only is that groundbreaking, but it was just a fantastic book as well. It was a good story, it had good pacing, it was entertaining, it kept me intrigued and interested to find out what was going to happen to this character and all these people around her. And just that independent spirit of the main character, and how I think that is reflected in Anne Bronte herself. So I always felt that Anne Bronte got the shaft, that she was overshadowed by her two sisters, the genius Charlotte Bronte and the crazy kooky Emily Bronte. And now that I've read this, I really do believe that Anne Bronte was the dark horse of the family. I think she was just as smart as her sisters. But unlike her sisters, instead of writing fantasy, she chose to talk about some real life situations and events that she witnessed as a governess and in all these households that she lived in as a young woman. And while I really doubt that there was ever situations like J.R.R. that happened in real life, I am 100% certain that real Victorian women lived lives similar to the Tenant of Wallfell Hall. And if it helped even one Victorian woman make a change in their life, I think it did its job. So I think all modern feminist literature can trace its roots back to this. That's how important I feel this book is. And I loved it. I don't want to say it's just a feminist book, that a man couldn't read this as well, because it does deal with some relationship dynamics that everyone deals with, especially what it's like to deal with a narcissist in your life, a person that is very manipulative and controlling and that uses you because they know that you love them. Very interesting in that respect as well. So I think if you have not read Tenant of Wallfell Hall, please do. It's amazing. And yes, in 2022, one of the first books on my TBR is Agnes Grey. I love Anne Bronte now. Number 1 and number 2 fluctuate in my mind a lot. Sometimes I rank this next book as number 1, and sometimes I rank it as number 2, but for the purposes of this video, I will just say that this is my number 2 pick of 2021, and that is Walden by Henry David Thoreau. So if you've been watching any of my videos, thank you so much. I am so grateful for all of my subscribers. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey, but I have talked about Walden a lot in my videos, and so you might know that how much I love this book, and here's all the book tarts that are in it. I read it back in, I would say September is when I wrapped up this book, and it just meant a lot to me. I think it really reflected some of the themes of 2020 and 2021 perfectly. Just that feeling of this need to just disconnect from your current life that is not working, your 9-to-5 job, you know, your crazy family, your kooky boss, and get back to the simple life, to just really start pursuing some of those goals and hobbies that are really important to you. and most importantly, reconnecting with nature, just getting back out there into camping and hiking and gardening and connecting with pets and loved ones. That's really what this book is about. It's about Thoreau, who in, I think, the late 1800s, the 1860s, he lived in Concord, Massachusetts, alongside other famous authors like Emerson. Emerson was one of his mentors, and people like Louisa May Alcott, who grew up being inspired by people like Emerson and Thoreau. So no wonder her books are fantastic. And he decides this one year in his life to just kind of leave society, to leave his job as a teacher and a jack of all trades, and go back into the woods, into the Walden woods at Walden Pond, build himself a cabin, live off the land, farm, hunt, fish, and do this experiment for about a year and just see if it makes him a better person. And he finds out that it does. He finds out that by just stopping his life, putting a pause, and just living in the moment, the day-to-day, out in nature, really makes him appreciate life more. So the majority of the book is nature writing, and then it goes back and it critiques modern Concord, Massachusetts life in 1860s, where he's complaining about things like the telegraph and the railroad. So I can only imagine what Thoreau would think of things nowadays like cell phones and computers and the internet, and how that's making us even more crazy. Really enjoy this so much. So many wonderful themes. It is a book I will probably be revisiting multiple times throughout my life and rereading all these passages. It's just a book that was really important to me this year. Also, this Gibbs Smith edition did not include it, but I also read Civil Disobedience, which is his short essay about standing up to government and society and people in authority. I thought that was also very timely this year. If you want to just get a taste of Thoreau, I do recommend Civil Disobedience. It's very timely. You can polish that essay off in about half an hour, and it'll really make you think as well. I think authors and thinkers like Thoreau are really resonating with the world right now. Love him. Okay, so number one should be no surprise. I've also talked about this book multiple times this year. In fact, I wouldn't shut up about it. And that is Anna Karenina by Leo Tolstoy. I read this book back in March, but it has consistently stayed my favorite book of the year. Not even Walden really surpassed the depth of this book. I loved it so much, and it is now one of my favorite classics of all time. It's now in the same league for me as books like J.R.R. and Pride and Prejudice. That's how much I love this book now. I'll probably reread it multiple times throughout my life, but I just wanted to put a plug out there for anyone like me who had never read it before and wants to. My motives for reading this book were entirely ego-based. I was viewing myself as an English major, a former teacher who had never read Anna Karenina. How dare I? The most embarrassing classic I have never read yet. That's what motivated me to read this book, I'm ashamed to say. But when I actually read it, I just realized how important it is and how much it just speaks to me and society at large. It's very difficult for me to articulate my feelings about Anna Karenina. That's how much I love this book. In fact, all year I have not been able to go back and write a review for it on Goodreads. I feel like there's just no point of writing a review of this book. It's that good. It's also a book you just really can't describe to people. It's a book that people have to experience on their own. You just have to read it on your own and form your own judgments of this book. That's why I love it so much. But on the surface level, I think a lot of people just assume, okay, it's about this woman, Anna Karenina, who is having this affair, and she leaves her husband for this good-looking young soldier. She causes this big stir in society. Yes, that is what this book is about on the surface level. That is what movies with Keira Knightley are all about. But this book on the deep level is about so much more than that. There is so much more going on in this book. In fact, I related, I would say, probably to the other main character in this novel, which is Levin. And a lot of people say that Levin was Tolstoy's alter ego, and just how he just is analyzing himself to death. Like, what is he going to do with his life? Who is he going to marry? He wants to be a good person, but he also still wants to make money. He wants to live a good life, but he's not sure how. He's disillusioned by people, by society. I loved it. A lot of people do not like those scenes with Levin when he's out with the farm hands in the wheat fields and he's, chopping down the wheat, cutting the wheat. I love those scenes. I'm one of those people that could have read just pages and pages of those scenes. The introspection of Tolstoy is phenomenal. I also like this book because it's told from multiple characters' perspectives. So you really get an idea of what is going on in all these characters' lives. There is no villain in this book. There are no heroes in this book. It's just about people and the choices that they make. And so when you read about some of these characters like Vronsky, who could be maybe a villain, or Anna Karenina, you understand why they do what they do because you know what their internal motivation is. And I love that. I love that you're coming at it from this very high perspective, and it's almost like you're looking down on the characters and they don't know why they're doing what they're doing, but you as the reader know why they're doing what they're doing. I loved it. It's a lot about people interacting with people, about human relationships, and how really at the end of the day, that's the most important thing. That's the thing that we all have to get right. And that it's about your relationship with yourself first. I think that's what Levin really learns in this book, is that if you can't get in alignment with yourself, it's going to affect every other relationship that you have, with family, with friends, with lovers, with partners. And that's kind of the tragedy of Anna Karenina. And I love that scene at the end in the train station where she's just really upset and she's walking around and everyone she meets is just evil and negative. And I feel that sometimes. I feel like when I go shopping or I go to the grocery store, I'm just like, oh, I can't stand people. And I get in that Anna Karenina mindset, and I have to remind myself that it's not the people, it's me. It's my projection of the world. I love this. I cannot articulate this book as much as I want to, how much I love it. I really recommend that everyone read it. It is amazing. Love this one so much. And yes, my favorite book of 2021. Thank you everyone for joining me for my 2021 wrap up. I loved all of these books. They were very important to me. They meant so much to me. Not only were they entertaining, but they taught me so much as well about myself, about the world, and they gave me a lot of encouragement and a lot of faith to just keep going and keep focusing on my goals. I really recommend all of these books to all of you out there in BookTube world. And again, thank you for everything that you've done this year as well. Watching your videos has really inspired me and encouraged me to keep on keeping on. Thank you everyone, and have a great new year. Happy 2022.